Lots of debate in federal politics this morning about the federal government's moves to limit the influence of big money in federal election campaigns. Among those raising concerns are the independent MPs, including Sophie Scomps, who represents the Sydney seat of Mackellar. Sophie Scomps joins us now. Thank you so much for giving us your time this morning. Sophie Scomps, good morning to you.
Good morning, how are you?
Very well, thank you. So the government wants to limit the influence of billionaires funneling money into either political party. This is a good thing, isn't it?
Yes, we welcome this. Many of us on the crossbench have been calling for greater electoral and donation reform because we need to restore that trust in our politics and our political system, and this is a really good start. One of the key things is increasing transparency around donations, so there's some really good things in that to increase transparency, so they are very welcomed.
Now, one of the issues you have raised concerns about, along with your independent colleagues, is a proposal to limit the amount of money spent in individual electorates. What, in your view, is wrong with that?
Well, we absolutely need to hold back the influence of very big donors like the Clive Palmer effect, who can sway elections, individuals that can sway elections, and that's what we saw with the Clive Palmer effect. But what we want to make sure that this is fairly applied across, both the parties and for minor parties and independents, because the last thing we want is to dampen down our democracy by shutting out, smaller parties and independents, because it's a really important part of our democracy. We saw at the last election that 1/3 of Australians voted outside the large parties, and so that's a change, and I think it concerns the major parties, so we want to ensure this is applied fairly and that there's still that chance for new entrants, individuals, independents to come in. It's a really important aspect of our democracy and one that's thriving.
You see there's a potential ulterior motive here, the government trying to limit the influence in the election of both Greens and independent MPs?
Look, we have to wait to see the detail, of course. We always hear that, but we haven't seen the legislation yet. So I think once we see that detail, we'll be able to comment more. But we'll be very closely looking at this, reviewing it and making sure that it is applied fairly, because we know that there's so much dark money in politics. I think for the 20 years up to 2020, there was $1.5 billion of undeclared dark money. So that type of influence really needs to be looked at. But we also want to make sure we have a vibrant democracy, that independents and smaller parties do have an opportunity to represent their communities, because we saw what happened at the last election. People really wanted a new alternative. They wanted a new way of doing politics. They'd had enough of the two-party adversarial headbutting. They want positive solutions, constructive, and that's one of the things that I and the other independents can bring to this, is working constructively across the political spectrum. The Australians want to see solutions. They don't want to see fighting and mudslinging, and I think that's where we come in to make a really constructive change in our parliament.
OK, we'll see how that plays out. On another front, you have been at odds with Bronwyn Bishop, the former Liberal MP for your seat there in Sydney, of course, former House of Representatives Speaker. Sophie Scomps, you are calling for greater aid to be allowed to flow to help Palestinians in Gaza. Bronwyn Bishop said, in her view, that made you part and parcel of an anti-Semitic movement. You raised concerns. This was Bronwyn Bishop on Sky TV last night.
I should not have said that. Dr Scomps has called for funding to be restored to UNRWA by Australia to address humanitarian crisis in Gaza. This does not make her an anti-Semite. I should not have suggested that. And I apologise to her for the offence, distress and harm I caused her.
Do you accept that apology?
Yes, of course, and I really thank Bronwyn Bishop for doing that, because it is such an important issue. We've had briefings from the UNRWA head about what is happening in Gaza. It is a humanitarian crisis, and I think we have to look at that as well. We have children starving with famine, so much going on there, and I've had so many emails from constituents who are deeply concerned about what's happening in Gaza. So we need to approach this with a humanitarian lens and really take the politics out of this. Again, came into politics to do it differently and to work constructively, and I don't think that type of commentary is constructive at all for our social cohesion here in Australia or for what's happening in Gaza.
Dr Sophie Scomps, really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
In other news, the Senate inquiry